And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment from very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. We have 6 days until the 2024 general election. 6 days until all of this is over, and most importantly, 6 days until I don't have to hear Kamala Harris's voice running for president anymore. Did you listen to her speech last night? Absolutely incredible. I don't think that I've ever heard that many lies come out of one politician's mouth in the span of 10 minutes. You know, it's also interesting that Kamala Harris really can't speak for all that long. You know, it's funny. Abraham Lincoln was once asked by a reporter, you know, Mr. Lincoln, how long would it take you to prepare a 2-minute speech? This was shortly after he delivered the Gettysburg Address. And he said, well, you know, I would probably start working on it about a month in advance. And then the reporter says, well, okay, well, what about a 30-minute speech? And he says, maybe a half a day. And then the follow-up question was, what about an hour? And President Lincoln looked at him and said, I'm ready now. So the point being is that any politician ought to be able to speak for any length of time. Now, that's not to say that Kamala Harris put any thought whatsoever into the speech she delivered last night, because I don't think that any of that is true. It was chock full of platitudes. In one breath, she would say, well, I have a plan to do X, Y, or Z. And usually you would expect them to explain what that plan is, how things are going to work, what's going to happen. When Trump speaks, he'll say, this is my plan to get rid of taxes on tips. And then he will explain why that's important. Or he would say, you know, I'm going to boost the economy by making sure that China isn't destroying our marketplace. And he would explain why that's going to be helpful. No, not Kamala Harris, not at all. The only thing she says is, I have a plan. The other thing I noticed last night is now Kamala Harris is in favor of tax cuts. In one breath, she says, well, you know, we have to make sure the rich pay their fair share. And I don't know if that was the exact phraseology, but that's what she meant. And then in the very next breath, she says, well, I'm going to give tax cuts. This is just another example of her mimicking exactly what Trump had said. Now, if you remember about a month ago, maybe it was 2 months ago, Kamala Harris comes out and she says, we're going to do away with tax on tips, which is exactly the same thing Trump had said a couple of weeks prior. Of course, Kamala Harris has no substance whatsoever, and the rest of the speech was absolutely nothing but demonization of conservatives. That Trump is a fascist. At one point, she called him a tyrant. She made reference to the American Revolution, that we threw off the constraints of a tyrant, and now we're about to put another one back in the Oval Office. A large chunk of the speech the only thing it had to do with was January 6th. that it was Trump's fault, that Trump meanly sat in the White House and watched all of the violence at the Capitol. Now, of course, there's no agreement that Trump offered the National Guard. There was no mention of Trump trying to implore Nancy Pelosi and the Capitol Police to beef up security before January 6th. No, none of that. It's all Trump's fault. Trump did it all. Trump incited the riot, and Trump wanted to hang Mike Pence. Essentially, that's pretty much what you got last night. And then, of course, she says, well, I offer a new generation of leadership. Well, that's not true at all. She has been in office for 3.5 years, and we should all go back to the soundbite where Anderson Cooper asked her, okay, so you've been in office for 3.5 years. Why haven't you done all of these things? And her answer was inane as everything else she has to say. But her speech yesterday was overshadowed by something President Joe Biden had to say. And this one, like, everybody's blowing their cork over that joke that was on stage at the Madison Square Garden event. And I agree the joke was a little off color, but it was a joke. We have got to get back to a place where we can actually make fun of things, where we take things as they are, as intended, as a joke, that nobody is really being serious, but it's dark humor. Now, I have a lot of friends that say, well, I have a really dark sense of humor. And they may say things in a joking manner, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they mean it. Well, there was this comedian at the Trump rally, and he made an off-color joke about Puerto Rico. That doesn't mean that he means it. It doesn't mean that Trump endorsed it. It doesn't mean that anybody attended that rally who watched him deliver the joke endorses it. It doesn't mean any of that. All it means is that it was a joke. Well, anyway, here is part of what Joe Biden had to say in response to that.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Wow! Talk about a deplorables moment by the president of the United States. Now, of course, this is nothing new for Joe Biden. He's been saying this sort of stuff his entire presidency. It was not that long ago that he stood outside of Independence Hall. And I mean, you guys remember that speech where the whole Independence Hall was backlit in red and there were Marines standing behind him and he was pounding the desk, railing against MAGA supporters, against MAGA. They're going to destroy the country. They're going to destroy democracy. Everybody remember that? Well, it's no different than what Joe Biden was saying last night, that the only garbage I see is Trump supporters. And that's what people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris really believe. Now, of course, Kamala can't come out and say that. She's not going to commit the freshman error. And I call it a freshman error because that's what it was unforced, didn't have to do it. But the error that Hillary Clinton said, I compare all of Trump supporters to what I call the basket of deplorables. That was unnecessary. It didn't help her campaign. And that's exactly what Joe Biden did last night. But there is something else at play in this, that Joe Biden was cast aside, that he was basically told if he didn't step aside from running for president, well, then they were going to completely do away with him, that they were going to use the 25th Amendment and that they would remove him from office. I'm sure that was the threat. Now, none of that came out publicly, and nobody gave an interview and said, well, if Biden didn't step aside, we're going to use the 25th Amendment. But I'm sure that was the threat. And that's why you saw Joe Biden so unceremoniously exit the 2024 campaign, and they replaced him with Kamala Harris. So there has been some friction in between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for a long time. In fact, if you'll notice, Joe Biden hasn't really been at any of the campaign rallies. I listened to an interview yesterday where somebody asked Joe Biden, hey, why aren't you down at Kamala Harris's speech? And he basically said, well, this is her moment. Well, I think it was more to the point that he was not invited, that they didn't want Joe Biden there because they didn't want the stain of the Biden-Harris presidency to be cast upon Kamala Harris, even though there's no possible way that she could ever escape it. So yesterday, my friends, was an example of why Kamala Harris is not going to be elected president of the United States, because American citizens see Kamala Harris for exactly who she is, a completely empty, vapid candidate who has only succeeded in politics because she has done what her, handlers have told her to do. Often in the campaign, you've heard her say, well, I prosecuted transnational gangs and transnational groups, and I was the world's greatest prosecutor. Well, none of that is true, and if it were, you would see in the media where there would be a report that says, well, Kamala Harris prosecuted this case, or she prosecuted that case. But if you'll notice, none of that has come out. You haven't seen one example of a case that Kamala Harris oversaw as a prosecutor. You would think if they had one of those, if they had a great example, they would be trumpeting it from the rooftops. Look at how great of a lawyer Kamala Harris is. And that brings up another good point. If Kamala Harris is this top-notch prosecutor, as she says she is, you would think she would be able to deliver a better closing argument. And closing arguments are kind of one of the things that lawyers have to do. But if she is such a seasoned lawyer and she is so adept at being in the courtroom, she would have been able to deliver a better closing speech than what you heard last night. Christine and I were talking last night, and I said, isn't it amazing where we're at? We're listening to this speech. Begrudgingly, by the way. Neither of us really wanted to listen to it because every syllable that came out of Kamala Harris's mouth was like nails on the chalkboard that is in my studio. Absolutely horrendous. But my question was, usually in elections past, the closing argument from the candidate would be sort of grandiose, talking about our amazing country, the 1,000 points of light, the city on the hill, how great America can become, and what a great job I'll do as president. But you didn't hear any of that. You didn't hear of what an amazing country we live in, or how the amazing things that Kamala Harris would do if she were president. You didn't hear a detailed explanation of her plan to save the economy, of her plan to continue the legacy that is the greatest nation on the planet. You didn't hear any of that. Instead, what you heard was Donald Trump is bad, he's a tyrant, he's a dictator, elect me. Well, that's not a persuasive argument for voters, and it's not a persuasive argument for any sort of courtroom, nor was there any reasoning behind it. If you are a skilled lawyer, you're able to reason and convince and persuade a jury to see things your way. But Kamala Harris isn't adept at persuading anyone. The choice that she has given American citizens is no more complicated than the other guy is terrible, I'm not as bad, so you should elect me. Well, the lesser of two evils argument has never been persuasive in American politics. Oh, sure, it works for a while, and maybe you'll get a couple of people on your side, but it's never going to work in the long term, because unless voters are completely idiotic, and American voters are not. In fact, most people, when they find the time to look at the election, and there is a significant group of voters that doesn't really make up their mind until a couple days before the election. And that's when they start doing their research, when they start figuring out who people are so that they can make a half-informed decision. But for the most part, when you've been inundated with the messaging coming from the Harris and the Biden administration for so long, that Trump is a dictator, January 6th was terrible, it was worse than the Civil War, Trump is a tyrant, he will do all these things, he's going to crash the economy, he's going to destroy our democracy. When you've heard that messaging over and over and over, it ceases to become persuasive. And what it becomes is the same old tired line. It loses its force and loses its value. It is very much the Chicken Little example, that the sky is falling. The sky is falling. Now, while that might work for a little bit, eventually when the sky doesn't fall, when it doesn't come crashing down around our temples, it loses its power. And that is exactly what you're seeing with the Harris administration. If you noticed, after the convention, there was a little bump in the polling for Kamala Harris, that the media was still fawning over her, and there were media appearances all over, and it was wall to wall Kamala Harris, and Bill Clinton got up there and gave a great speech. Well, everybody said it was a great speech. I didn't think it was good. Barack Obama gave a nice speech. And, and that's another thing. I never thought that Barack Obama was a good orator. I don't know why people think that. His cadence is all off, and I found it really to be really offensive. But there again, different strokes for different folks, I guess. But anyway, those two guys got up there and they gave great speeches, or people said they were great speeches. And then there was a bump in the polling that Kamala Harris was going to steal the election. Little did they know that that was exactly their intention, though I don't know how effective they're going to be this time around. But that little post-convention bump came to an end rather quickly. And there's a big reason why. Because it became clear that the Harris administration was going to have to get her out in front of public. And so she started doing a lot of these ridiculous interviews with, outlets that don't really matter and that nobody listens to. And, the interviews, there was nothing substantive that came out of it. I mean, when you go on a podcast that's entitled Call Her Daddy, what do you expect the result is going to be? Oh, sure, you might convince a couple of pedantic and vapid people that actually watch that stupid podcast to vote for you, but that's all you're going to get. And when you're running for president, it doesn't do you much good to convince a voter here and a voter there. You have to convince a vast majority of American voters to vote for you, and that's just not going to do it. Now, let's talk about the Joe Rogan podcast for a minute. He's an interesting character. He's not exactly on the left or the right. In fact, I think he's more to the left than anything. But Joe Rogan offered her some time on his show. Now, Joe Rogan's podcast is the biggest in the world. There are millions upon millions, tens of millions of people that subscribe to his show. What a great outlet to sit down and get your ideas across. But she turned him down, and it was Joe Rogan. I think I covered this story yesterday on the show, where he said that, it wasn't that she out and out refused to do the interview. Rather, she wanted to do it on her terms. Well, that's not how interviews work. If you want to go on an outlet, you have to play by their rules. That's one of the beauties of having a media outlet like Cowboy State Politics or the Independence Network or the Joe Rogan podcast. You have to play by their rules. And the game is, can you play within those rules and still be effective? Well, Kamala Harris didn't want to do that. In fact, she wanted Joe Rogan to travel outside of his studio and to meet her in Washington, D.C. And she didn't want to do the 3-hour podcast, which is how Joe Rogan conducts his podcast. I can't imagine broadcasting for 3 hours. I tend to think that brevity is the soul of wit, and I don't think if it takes 3 hours for you to get to a point, you're probably going to miss it. But in any case, what an incredible opportunity that Kamala Harris cast aside to talk to millions upon millions of voters. Now, the reason why she did that is there's nothing upstairs. A friend of mine, and I mentioned this yesterday on the show, a friend of mine asked me, what do you think that Kamala Harris's IQ is? And I said, it is slightly above average. There is no other possibility. Now, Donald Trump, he's a pretty smart guy, and I would expect that his intelligence is actually pretty high. But when you look at Kamala Harris, here's the reason why I say she's not all that intelligent. Because even if you talk to a person who is not all that bright and you ask them a question, they may stumble around for a little bit, but eventually they'll wander into the answer that you're looking for. And it may not be that artful, it may not be that eloquent, but still they were going to give you the answer that you want. Not Kamala Harris. She slips into this ridiculous word salad that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so if she were subjected to 3 hours of Joe Rogan, and I'll admit I've watched a couple of Joe Rogan's podcasts, and he does ask some what I think are pretty intelligent questions sometimes. And if it's 3 hours worth of questioning, I don't think that Kamala Harris could sustain that. I don't think that she could come up with enough word salads in 3 hours to keep everybody awake and watching it. And that is the reason why she didn't do it, because she is incapable of doing that. Contrast that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump had no problem sitting down with Joe Rogan and talking to him for 3 hours. And that is the difference, my friends. Donald Trump is willing to talk to the American people. Kamala Harris is not. She is more attuned to talking at them, not talking with them. And so when you look at this entire race and, the closing arguments, everybody said that Trump's closing argument was at Madison Square Garden. And I think it probably was. It was a giant event. Madison Square Garden was packed to the gills. and there were people lined up for what I was told at least a half a mile around there. Don't know if that's actually true, but if you looked at pictures from the outside of Madison Square Garden, there were a lot of people there. So when you compare the two closing arguments, one, a vision of what this country can become and how Donald Trump wants to fix things, versus what Kamala Harris had to say, which is basically, Trump is bad, you should elect me. Well, the lesser of two evils never works in American politics for very long anyway, and that is the problem with Kamala Harris. American voters aren't stupid. They'll figure it out, and they're not going to vote for Kamala Harris. More after the break. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carretti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble Room, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics on the Independence Network, on YouTube, on X, for almost omnipresent. Documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. Yeah, I can barely believe that that's actually the number, but it is. And I'll tell you how I calculate it. Anytime that I have to issue a retraction, which of course I do, and that's what helps my credibility, right? When I get something wrong, which isn't very often, the very first thing I do in the next program is I correct it. And I bring it up front and I lead with my mistakes. And so I take the amount of retractions that I've had to make, which is not that many. I think we're up to 7. I subtract that from the total number of episodes of Cowboy State Politics that I've done and divide by the total, and that's what you get. And it's 99% of the time. So, the longer I do this program, I continually learn. And I'm one of those people that thinks that if you don't learn something every day, well, then you've kind of, given up. I mean, you've kind of have a wasted day, and there's something that everybody can learn every single day. So the other day, and you would think that I would already know this, but I am continually learning stuff about all the equipment in the Cowboy State Politics studio. And so I just figured out how to do this. This is an ad Again, playing audio from different sources in the studio. It's a little bit more complicated than you would think, but I just figured out how to do this one. So let's see here. Check this out. Now, that was my friend Mike Arzi, and he's running for Sheridan County Commissioner. Here's why I brought that up. Before the break, we were talking about the authenticity or lack thereof of Kamala Harris. And there are many candidates who are inauthentic, but there are those few candidates who are who they say they are. And my pal Mike Arzi is one of those. Now, he's running for Sheridan County Commissioner, and we tooled up that ad last night for him, so I just wanted to play it for you. An authentic guy who, ever since I've known him, he has done exactly what he said he was going to do. And so if you live in Sheridan County, remember to vote for Mike Arzi on November the 5th. Also, vote for Holly Jennings on November the 5th. Your local races are just as important as some of the bigger ones. A lot of people, they focus on national politics all the time, and while that is one of the more irritating things that I encounter, a lot of people do that. And here's why I say that they're way more important. Because the things that happen at the local level affect your life to a greater degree than do things that happen at the state level or even the national level. If your city council makes a decision, well, that's going to have a direct effect on your life. I mean, you live there. And so, if the city council passes some sort of stupid nuisance ordinance, which a lot of city councils around the state have done, well, that affects you. It means you have to take care of your property a little bit better, or you have to comply with the law. Or what about the city building commission? I don't know if I've told you about this. And, it's, again, this is one of those things, little rabbit trail that comes up during the program. But we've been working on getting a salon put together for the lovely Christine. It's going to be amazing. Last night, Christine and I got the floor put in. So we're pretty proud of that. But before it ever started, we had to have a building permit. And so I got online and I went through every web page with the city of Sheridan's building permit thing. And I filled out every field. And, some questions I didn't know the answer to, but I answered it the best I could. I even called a couple of people, said, hey, how do you answer this question? And so it got submitted. And for 2 weeks, nothing happened. I didn't get an email from the planning board or whatever the stupid board's name is. And then finally, I walked down to the office and I said, hey, what's up with my permit? And the gal at the front desk said, well, it takes 2 weeks. And I said, okay, that's great. But 2 weeks has passed and I have not seen anything. So can I start building or what? And then I start getting emails. And I get this one that says, hey, you need to call me. So I call the guy. And he proceeds to tell me that I need an architect or an engineer to sign off on the plans for the salon, which of course is ridiculous because all we're doing is putting up a couple of false walls and a couple of sinks, and that's about it. So an electrician, a plumber, and that's it. I don't need an architect. We're not changing anything structural in the building, so why would you need an engineer? Then he said, quote, you obviously don't know what you're doing. You need to hire a professional, which you can imagine the top of my head came off because I did not have my stack of duct tape handy, and I wasn't expecting that. Well, my head exploded, and the very next thing I did was go to the city council, and I told them that they are the reason that business does not expand in Sheridan County. And wouldn't you know, I got a phone call the next morning, and that idiot that worked at the planning department, who, by the way, didn't even live in the state of Wyoming. He lived in, some other state back east, Tennessee, I think. Anyway, the message I got was, he no longer works for the city and your permit is approved. Start building. Well, the reason why I bring that up is that those are the decisions that affect your life to a great degree, and sometimes almost immediately. And those people that you elect to those positions, city council in this case, they make decisions that absolutely affect your life. Now, I'm not saying that decisions at the state level don't affect your life. They do. But generally speaking, you don't see the direct effect that you do at the city council. And then the national level, well, yeah, those decisions affect your life, but they are so far removed that eventually it takes a long time for those things to affect you. So really, when you go in to vote, you should really be paying attention to all of the down ballot races. That's the phrase they use. Down ballot means you have the top race, which of course in this case is Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. And everything below that, every lower office, those are the down ballot races. And you need to pay attention to them. And all the way to the school board and different boards that you elect in your various counties, those are tremendously important. And you make a wrong decision there, and you may end up, with a nuisance ordinance or a guy in the planning department who hates business, which that's the best way that I could describe that idiot. Well, coming up after the break, we're going to talk about a subject I brought up on the podcast, I think it was last week. But the Kelly Walsh Marching Band had a routine that was, the best way to describe that is pagan in nature. Yeah, they were all, they had a bunch of horns on the field and an altar, and they sacrificed a cheerleader. We'll talk about that next. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it's hunting season. And one thing that you can be absolutely certain of is while you're tromping around in the boonies, at some point, it's going to snow. A lot. And you definitely want to make sure that you keep your feet nice and toasty warm. The best way that you can do that is to order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the warmest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Watch out! Cowboy state politics is only going to get stronger. It's only going to continue to expand from every county in this state to every state in the nation. It's Cowboy state politics. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Wyoming's conservative voice, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. I cannot get away from Kamala Harris. I did a 20-minute monologue at the beginning of the program, and I thought I had covered everything. And then the TV in the studio, of course, you can't see that on the Ditto Cam, but in the studio, I have a big, giant TV, and usually it's trained on Fox News. And the Chiron said, and thank God I have the duct tape, and I've already prepared my head for today, but the Chiron said, Kamala Harris is going to remove illegal immigrants quickly. What? I don't even know how she could say that. And then in the very next breath, and I remember this clearly from last night, she says, this immigration issue, it's just being used to scare up votes. Oh my God. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that thing and just count the lies. Oh, just killing me. And it's days like today where you just never run short of content. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to open up the phone lines. And if you guys want to talk about the Kamala Harris speech or the general election or Donald Trump, whatever, let's go ahead and talk about it. The phone number is 307-374-8989. It's 307-374-8989. If something's on your mind, go ahead and give me a call and we'll talk about it. The phone lines are open. If you're watching on the Ditto Cam, the phone number is right there at the bottom of the screen. One more time, it's 307-374-8989. That's the call-in studio line. So before the break, I told you we were going to talk about this marching band routine down in Casper. And we've talked about this a few times on the program. I talked about it a little bit on the podcast. But basically what happened is the Kelly Walsh High School Marching Band had a routine in which they set up an altar on the football field or at the Casper Event Center, wherever they held the state competition. And they had horns surrounding the altar, and they were all praying like to the sun god or something. And then they sacrificed a cheerleader, complete with screams, blood-curdling screams from the cheerleader. Now, of course, they didn't actually sacrifice her, but I mean, the intention was there. And so a couple of questions. First of all, who was the band instructor that okayed this? Well, before then, where are the parents? Where were the parents that said, whoa, we're not going to do this. I'm not letting my kid be involved in this. Where are those people? Evidently, they were absent. And then the band instructor, who there's an article in the Cowboy that we're going to go into here in just a second. But the band instructor evidently okayed this. And I'm sure the principal knew what was happening. So the principal okayed this thing. And then the guy at the top, and remember, in things like this, poop always rolls uphill. The guy at the top, who's in charge of the Wyoming High School Activities Association, is a guy named Trevor Wilson. Now, Trevor Wilson obviously signed off on this thing. And so all of the blame falls on him. He's the guy that allowed this thing to happen. He's the guy that allowed them to perform a mock human sacrifice at a Wyoming high school event. Absolutely shocking, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. I don't think that school officials are going to answer too many. I mean, unless parents get fired up enough and they end up at the Natrona County School Board meeting and demand answers, which, by the way, is what they should do. But there's an article in the Cowboy, and it's entitled "Mock Sacrifice in Casper. Marching Band Routine Draws Outrage from Parents." And this is classic Cowboy, right? They are so late to the party. This thing happened last week or the week before, and they're just now reporting on it. Cowboy State Politics and the Independence Network have been on this since the very beginning. But it just shows you how quickly this program can respond and how long it takes the Wyoming lamestream media to. But let me just read you the first opening paragraphs here. And I quote, "A controversial marching band performance that included acting out a sacrificial stabbing on an altar was the target of praise and outrage from local parents at a Monday meeting of the Natrona County School District Board of Education. The performance by the Kelly Walsh High School Marching Band at the October 19th state competition was titled, quote, 'The Offering,' and included a dramatic reenactment of someone on an altar being sacrificed. The band earned a superior rating for its performance, and the school board began the meeting by honoring the band for its several years of dedication and excellent showings at competitions and festivals. Several band members were at the meeting during the recognition. Band director Brent Rose said that the band placed first at a competition at the University of Wyoming and swept the category awards that include percussion, marching, music, winds, and guard. The band also took those 5 caption or category awards at the State Marching Band Festival and a superior rating. Quote, We are the only band to do that this year. In fact, we're the only band in the history of the state of Wyoming to win the UW competition, sweep the caption awards at UW, and sweep the caption awards at state. And that is a feat that we've done for the last 3 years in a row, he said. We're very proud of our tradition here at Kelly Walsh, sacrificing cheerleaders and all. Of course, that last part he didn't include, though he absolutely should have. Now, here's the problem. Why is it that we allow a mock sacrifice on an altar, obviously very, very pagan, and some might say a little bit demonic, but you can't have a Bible in a school? Why is that? Why are there not people that are marching around the school saying separation of church and state, separation of church and state? Well, it's because that only applies to Christians. It only applies to people who love Jesus and believe in the Bible. Anybody else, well, that's entirely fair game. And, take, for example, Grand Dragon Satan Socks, as Joey calls him, the lobbyist for the Wyoming Education Association, Tate Mullen. Yeah, he is an avowed Satanist, and you can look at, and I don't know if the post is still up on his Facebook page, but he had a post that said for his birthday, he wanted people to donate to the Church of Satan. Now, if you want to see that post, it's on the Cowboy State Politics website. You can go look at that. And there was a Casper City councilman who defended Tate Mullen, saying, well, all this Satanism stuff, you're really taking it out of context there, Iverson. Really, it's about knowledge, keeping an open mind. Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what Satan would say, that it's all about just keep an open mind. I'm sure the snake in the garden said that exact same thing to Eve. And just, did God really mean that? Just keep an open mind about this whole apple thing. Uh-huh. Well, now it is crept inside the high school where you have the band director and the principal and all that okaying this stupid and, quite frankly, offensive routine by the Kelly Walsh marching band. And the question is, where are the heads going to roll? Where are people going to be held accountable? And pun intended on the previous comment, by the way. So will it be Trevor Wilson who absolutely okayed this thing? Or now let's just take a step back here, and let's say perhaps Trevor Wilson didn't know that Kelly Walsh was going to perform this thing. And I find that hard to believe because it was publicized, at least on social media, quite a bit before they actually went to the state competition. I think I received pictures of this thing like a couple days before the state competition. So at the very least, there was some warning that Trevor Wilson could have looked at and said, whoa, I don't know if I'm going to okay this. But in the end, he did. And then the judges at the state competition said, yeah, this is okay. In fact, this is exactly the example we want to set for marching bands across the state. But really, all of this boils down to parental involvement, I think. If parents were involved in their child's education, they would know exactly what their marching band kids were going to do and what they were planning. There's really no way that you could hide this, I don't think. But evidently they tried to do that, and it's absolutely offensive. And I don't really see how it's appropriate in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you want to comment on that, the phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. Go ahead and give me a call. The phone lines are going to stay open for the duration of the program. So once again, that phone number is 307-374-8989. To the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, in an article entitled, City Commits More Than $7 Million to Bring 300 Housing Units to Town. A couple of problems right from the very beginning. Your government does not need to be, nor is it entitled to be, in the landlord business. Towns and cities and people at the national level are decrying the lack of affordable housing. And somehow, liberals are thinking that, well, the city and the government needs to be getting involved. We have to have affordable housing. That's what they always say. Anytime you hear the word affordable housing, you should just replace the word affordable with subsidized. And what that means is your tax dollars are going towards paying the rent for other people. To the article, and I quote, the Cheyenne City Council unanimously expressed its support Monday night for new housing developments in town, committing nearly $7.4 million to help develop 2 apartment complexes with around 300 new units. Now, Casper's kind of a big town. I would imagine there's somewhere around 40,000 people that live there. Don't quote me on the number, but it's a pretty big town in comparison to like a place like Sheridan or Buffalo. And the question is, would 300 apartments really go that far in providing affordable housing? The answer to that is no. They'll probably fill up pretty quickly. And secondly, why is the government involved in this? This is not an essential function of government. It is not one of the duties that government is supposed to provide. It is not the proper role of government. But let's continue with the article. The developer, Sioux Falls, South Dakota-based Stencil Group, will receive the money through, and this is awesome here, listen to this, through tax increment financing, or TIF, which allows municipalities to fund public improvement projects by borrowing against the future increase of property taxes. Let me repeat that for you. It allows municipalities to fund public improvement projects by borrowing against future increases in property taxes. So they don't actually have the money. There's no guarantee that they're going to have the money, but they're going to borrow against the possibility of receiving the money through increased property taxes. Now, what happens if the legislature goes down? There are a bunch of conservatives who take control of the legislature and they say, you know what, we're kind of tired of these high property tax increases, and we're actually going to do something about it, and property taxes go down. Well, then there is no increase in the property taxes. Now, the second problem with this is that states and municipalities can't print their own money. Only the federal government can do that. But at the federal level, when the government needs money, they just hit the old print button on the printing press, and out comes the money. Now, of course, that's a simplistic characterization of it because really it's all just ones and zeros. But they just print the money. Now, states can't do that. But essentially, it's the same thing. You're trying to create money out of thin air that you don't already have, and you're borrowing it against future tax increases. So it's far worse than just spending taxpayer dollars. We're spending it on the possibility, on the hope that in the future, we're going to have tax increases and we're going to take that money. This is no different than just printing money, and essentially the city of Cheyenne is putting their citizens in debt to themselves. This is exactly what the federal government does, and it is absolutely outrageous. But allow me to continue. It gets better. The intent is that after the TIF period has ended, the city will begin realizing revenue from the annual property taxes, and the public will benefit from the investment. No, the public is not going to benefit. The people that will benefit are the folks that can't afford the rent, and so they're going to move into these apartment complexes, and you, my friends, are going to pay for it. The public is not going to benefit. The public is going to pay for it. But this is exactly what happens with these harebrained, stupid idiots that are in city and county government. They think that this is okay. They think that this is the proper role of government, and they're absolutely indebting you to pay for it. Government doesn't need to be in the landlord business. Oh, God, it just makes my head explode. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Cowboy State Politics is sponsored by FreedomGoldUSA.com. They are the working man's gold company. The economy is in turmoil. The stock market pretty much is out of control, and you never know what's going to happen with your finances or your income. One way that you can shore up everything is by investing in gold and silver. Go to freedomgoldusa.com/David for a free interview to discuss your options and find out if gold or silver is right for you. One more time, that's freedomgoldusa.com/David. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics, on Facebook, on Twitter, on the Independence Network, pretty much everywhere that you want to get this program. Don't forget to listen to the podcast, which you can find everywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, pretty much everywhere. Go to Google, type in Cowboy State Politics. You can find it. And the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. Before the break, we were talking about this harebrained scheme to borrow money from future tax receipts on the backs of Wyoming citizens. Now, here's the kicker, and I didn't get to it before the break, but listen to this. The money is not even going to a Wyoming contractor. It's going to a guy in South Dakota to build these housing developments. This is absolutely outrageous, my friends. If you live in Cheyenne, you should be more angry than I am. And it's I can't express to you how much this irritates the crap out of me, because it's bureaucrats, local government bureaucrats, thinking that they have absolute control over your money. And it's not even the money that you have. It's the money in the future that you're going to earn and that you're going to pay taxes with. So none of this is guaranteed. Oh man, I got to settle down and listen to something that makes me happy. So there is a video that's floating around Twitter, or X. I'm so trying to get out of the habit of calling it Twitter. It's X. But anyway, that's kind of becoming my new go-to social media platform. And there is a video floating around of Harriet Hageman, and it's not new. This is not a new video that her campaign put out. But what's interesting about it is that it is now making the rounds again. Harriet's had 2 years to do an amazing job in the Wyoming House of Representatives. So I just want to play this ad for you. Kind of a little nostalgia. A lot of it is coming from, her rally with Donald Trump. So let me just play it for you.
Well, I think she's one of the weakest candidates I've ever seen in the history of our country. Intellectually, just really kind of the bottom of the barrel. I think she was a DEI hire. I just don't think that they have anybody else. I just think that they're in real disarray. We're fed up with the Green New Deal and the socialists who created it. We're fed up with the attacks on our fossil fuel and energy industries. We're fed up with an open border. We're fed up with human trafficking. We're fed up with fentanyl flooding our country. And we're fed up with illegal immigration. We're fed up with the corruption in the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, the NSA, and the FISA court. We're fed up with mask mandates, vaccine mandates, the CDC, the NIH, the WHO, and the misinformation campaign surrounding COVID-19. And we're fed up with Anthony Fauci. We're fed up with the politicians and the elitists in D.C. who are getting rich while the middle class falls further behind every year. We're fed up with Joe Biden, with Nancy Pelosi. We're fed up with the January 6th Commission and those people who think that they can gaslight us. And we're fed up with Liz Cheney. As of November 8th, we're taking our country back.
Now that ought to be enough to raise your spirits a little bit. I know that it raised mine. I am absolutely impressed with the job that Harriet Hageman has been doing in the United States Congress. I knew from the very beginning that she would do an amazing job, and I think that she has exceeded even my expectations of her. Just absolutely incredible. And if you think about all the things that Harriet has weighed in on, now she's only one person out of 435 in the House of Representatives. So, I mean, there's not a lot that she can do on her own. But still, if you ever get bored, just get on YouTube and type in Harriet Hageman Committee, and you'll find something amazing and entertaining to watch, because she is constantly grilling these people that have embedded themselves in the deep state. These folks that really are the cause behind a lot of the misery that we have been going through. And it runs the gamut from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the IRS to the Board of Education, or not the Board of Education, the Department of Education. And it's, again, you pick any committee meeting and you're going to find something amazing that Harriet Hageman has done. And but speaking of which, the Federalist gave us a little shout out the other day, day before yesterday. And it's, they quoted an interview that I did with Harriet when I asked her if she was going to run for governor, which, by the way, she didn't really answer that question one way or another. And I don't think it's fair to ask her to answer that question. I mean, she's doing a heck of a job in Washington, D.C., in the House. She would do an amazing job as governor. In fact, I think that Harriet would do an amazing job in anything that she did. But in any case, we made a good choice with her. We got about 4 minutes left in the broadcast. If you want to get a quick phone call in, it's 374-8989. Go ahead and give me a call. So before the break, we were talking about this ridiculous scheme to give $7 million of taxpayer money to this developer, the South Dakota-based developer, not even in Wyoming. And the irony of the whole thing is it's only going to construct 300 housing units or 300 apartments, which is not going to have the effect. It's really not going to help anybody. I mean, the 300 people that are going to have part of their rent paid by you. Yeah, I guess it'll help those folks, but that's about it. And I don't really see why we need to give taxpayer dollars to private individuals. In fact, our Constitution absolutely prevents it. Article 16, Section 6, I think. And maybe, just maybe, the Cheyenne City Council should look up that little provision, because they can't give our money to a private company. You can't give or loan our credit, which is exactly what the city of Cheyenne is doing, to anybody, to a private corporation, to a private company, to anybody. I mean, I got to move on, because this thing is going to make my head explode. We got about 3 minutes left. So there's this interesting article, and it was written in this obscure website called The Gothamite, which is interesting that they're referring to New York City as Gotham City. I think the parallels are pretty close. But anyway, Mayor Adams says it's silly to ask whether Trump is a fascist, and I absolutely agree. I think American citizens are so tired of the trope that Donald Trump is a dictator and he's a fascist. And I mean, he is none of those things. And the truth is that before he ran for president, the very people that are calling him a fascist and a dictator, they were the ones that were trying to get a meeting with him. There's all sorts of pictures with him and Al Sharpton, him and Hillary Clinton, barf, him and just about every liberal around there. But he decides to run for president, and he says that he's a Republican, and then all of a sudden, he's a fascist and he's a dictator. But to the article, and I quote, at a combative City Hall press conference on Tuesday, Mayor Adams defended the NYPD's chief's recent appearance on the right-wing network Newsmax and dodged questions from reporters on his stance on former President Donald Trump. Quote, when I'm at these town halls talking to people there, they're not asking me these silly questions, the mayor said. We're in this bubble, you know. Now, Adams' remark, which came a week before Election Day, highlighted his growing political alienation as he fights federal corruption charges. Now, in the reason why he was asked whether he believes that Trump is a racist or a fascist was because he is already embroiled in scandal. So it's just another attempt to further further entrench him in more scandals so the paper has more to write about him. And so that it just keeps pushing him further and further into that whole corruption thing. And it was, at the Al Smith dinner, Donald Trump made a couple cracks about Mayor Adams. And, I don't know that. I haven't really looked into the charges against him. I think I did a quick story on what they're accusing him of. But it is, it's another case of trumping up charges from things that happened in the guy's past. None of the stuff he's being accused of actually happened while he was in office. It was all after he was out of office. But anyway, we'll keep an eye out for it. We've come to the end of another busy broadcast hour on the program from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics.